The alien stared, but why was the human smiling? That was the first thing they noticed. A fragile race of beings, with skin translucent enough to see their veins like faint silver threads and eyes too large, too full of fear. They had lived for centuries hiding, never challenging, never striking, never daring. And yet here they were, trembling at the edge of annihilation, placing their survival in the hands of something they couldn't possibly understand. Humans. Humans were unpredictable, terrifyingly stubborn, infuriatingly courageous, and impossibly loud when silence would have been wiser. They had watched them from a distance for decades, studying, cataloging, warning each other, do not trust them. They are uncontrollable, and now in the face of extinction they had no choice. The human in front of them, tall, shoulders squared, eyes hard but not unkind, simply smiled. He didn't wave a weapon, didn't make demands, he just smiled. That simple gesture, so ordinary to a human, felt like a defiance to the universe itself. "Why us?" one of the whispered, voice quivering like a fragile crystal breaking under pressure. Their words carried across the silent chamber, echoing softly. "Why do you help? We are nothing. We are weak." The human's smile didn't falter. Because weak or strong, survival isn't measured by what you can lift or how fast you run. It's measured by whether you try at all. And you tried. You didn't fight. You didn't hide. You survived this long. That matters. That matters more than anything. They tilted their head, curiosity wrestling with disbelief. Survival. These humans spoke of things they barely understood. Courage, defiance, hope. Such concepts were irrelevant in the cold calculus of life. There were rules, precision, safety, logic, but humans thrived on the impossible, and that was terrifying. Out in the wreckage of there, the sky burned with silent storms. Fires that should have ended everything licked at the edges of the city. They had counted on fleeing, on surrendering quietly to fate. But now the human moved among them with an ease that was maddening. Calm, confident, as if the chaos were just another part of the scenery. "You think this is funny?" one of the younger hissed, voice tight with panic. "Our world is burning, our people are dying." The human crouched beside a collapsed building, brushing rubble aside with hands that were steady and unbroken. "Funny?" he asked. "No, terrifying, but I've seen worse. And if I can survive that, I can survive this. And I'm not alone. You're still here, aren't you?" There was silence, then a flicker of something. A tiny spark, recognition, perhaps even hope. They weren't used to hope. Hope was reckless. Hope could kill you. Yet here it was, crawling back into their hearts like a timid animal, nudged awake by human insistence. The human stood again, shoulders squared, and looked at the sky. "I need you to listen," he said. His voice was calm now, commanding, almost impossible to ignore. "We don't have a lot of time, and we don't get a second chance. But we can survive, you and I together. It won't be easy. Nothing worth saving ever is. And you'll have to trust me. Not because you have to, but because we have no other choice." And they did. Somehow, against every instinct, against every fear, they did. The first night passed with little sleep. The humans moved with careful precision, setting up makeshift defenses, scavenging what little resources remained. They watched, amazed and terrified. These creatures laughed. They joked. They sang quietly to themselves as they worked, and still in the face of devastation, they kept moving forward. One of the elder finally broke the silence. They are relentless," he murmured. "They laugh when all we do is despair. They fight when we have surrendered. They survive," the young human said simply. And that was the truth, that simple, terrifying truth that no could deny. As the first light of a broken sun crept across the horizon, painting the ruins in shades of gold and blood, they realized something terrifying and beautiful at the same time. Humans were unstoppable. Even in their weakness, even in their imperfection, they would endure. And somehow, they had just offered them a chance to endure, too. But endurance came with a price they were only beginning to understand. And for the first time in centuries, they wondered, could they really survive with humans? "They said we wouldn't make it," the human muttered, staring at the horizon where jagged shadows of broken cities stretched like scars across the land. "They said no one could survive out here, and yet here we are." They didn't respond. They watched him, silently cataloging, analyzing, still uncertain whether his optimism was bravery or madness. To them, the world was a precise equation, numbers, probabilities, outcomes. Humans, Humans were chaos wrapped in flesh, unpredictable, dangerous, beautifully dangerous. A tremor shook the ground beneath them, and dust cascaded from the fractured buildings. The flinched, but the human laughed. Not a sharp, startled laugh, but a low, steady chuckle, as if the tremor were a joke only he understood. "See," he said, wiping dirt from his hands. "You flinch, I laugh, that's how we get through it. Fear is inevitable, laughing in its face, that's what makes us human." One of the younger tilted her head, struggling to comprehend. Why are you not afraid?" The human crouched beside her, meeting her oversized, luminous eyes with his own. "Because being afraid doesn't solve anything," he said. "It only keeps you frozen, and right now we don't get frozen, we move, we survive, together." They weren't used to togetherness in that sense. Survival meant solitude, precision, and avoidance. But humans survived by leaning on each other, by trusting, by defying the odds together. That was madness. That was brilliance. Night fell again, colder than expected. The wind whispered through ruined towers, carrying the scent of ash and something darker, something alive. Shadows moved with a hunger that they could feel in their bones, a predator's pulse in the quiet. The human lit a small fire, its glow spilling over the wreckage. "We rest here," he said. "Short, no more than an hour, then we move. Keep your eyes open, keep your heads low, and don't underestimate them." One of the trembling asked, "And if we cannot survive, if we fail?" The human smile returned, sharp and unwavering. "Then at least we tried, and that is enough for me, because trying, that's what makes life matter. Not winning, not surviving, but daring to try anyway." A silence fell. For the first time, they felt something they hadn't in centuries, a fragile glimmer of hope. Hope didn't solve problems, hope didn't rebuild worlds, but it reminded you were alive. And sometimes that was enough to ignite change. Suddenly a sound sliced through the night, a shriek metallic and unnatural echoing from the ruins. The froze, the human didn't flinch. He moved toward the sound, hand extended. "Stay close, watch, learn, you'll understand why we do this." They followed, heartbeats synchronizing with his pace. Fear gnawed at them, but there was a rhythm to the human's calm. Step by step, he approached the source. A small creature trapped beneath a collapsed beam, its body broken, its eyes wide with terror. They recoiled. "Leave it, we cannot." The human ignored them. With one hand, he lifted the beam. With the other, he cradled the creature, murmuring softly, "It's okay, you're safe now, we've got you." They watched, stunned. Humans didn't just survive chaos, they reached into it, reshaped it. They saved not for glory, not for gain, but because it was possible, because it mattered. And somehow, that act of reckless compassion made the sphere seem smaller, almost irrelevant. "You see," the human said, setting the creature down gently. "Strength isn't just muscle, courage isn't just bravery, it's love, it's stubbornness. It's refusing to let the world tell you you're weak." One elder, his translucent skin quivering in the firelight, whispered, "They are different, not like us, not like anything we have known, and yet they endure." The human glanced at him. "Endurance isn't just surviving, it's choosing to keep moving when everything tells you to stop. That's human. And you can choose it too, or at least try." They were silent, trying. Could they even imagine it? Could they embrace the chaos, the laughter, the audacity of these beings who dared to defy the impossible every single day? The first stars appeared overhead, distant and indifferent. The fire crackled, throwing light across their fragile forms. The human sat down, inviting them to rest beside him. "Tomorrow," he said softly, "we take the next step. But tonight we remember that we can, that's enough to keep us alive." And for the first time, they didn't argue. They didn't calculate or debate. They simply sat, fragile beings trembling in the firelight, and let themselves feel the impossible, hope. The human smiled again, just a little, almost imperceptibly, as if he knew something they did not. And maybe he did. Because humans never stopped believing in the impossible. The sun rose, fractured and bleeding across the ruins, painting everything in shades of fire and shadow. They had learned in the short hours of night that humans didn't wait for perfect conditions. They acted, they moved, they endured, and now the first real test of that endurance was coming. "They're close," the human said, scanning the horizon with eyes sharper than the expected. "Not everything that moves wants to be caught, but some things want only to destroy." A shiver ran through they had never experienced violence like this, not since the earliest days of their civilization. There had been wars, yes, but carefully calculated, surgical, precise. Nothing like the chaos of raw hunger and instinct that stalked the broken world now. One young whispered, trembling, We cannot fight them, we are fragile." The human crouched beside her, calm, unyielding. "Fragile doesn't mean powerless. It means starting from a place others underestimate. That's where humans shine, and we're going to shine together." They studied him, trying to grasp what he meant. Humans were reckless, yes, foolhardy often, but there was a pattern, a rhythm to their madness. A stubborn insistence on surviving that bent probability in their favor. That was something they had never seen before, something they couldn't calculate, couldn't control. The first shadow appeared long before the creatures did, stretching across the rubble like a dark stain. The humans moved with silent precision, taking positions, eyes scanning, hearts steady even as fear whispered in their ears. The creatures struck, and it was worse than anything they had imagined. Metallic claws, sharp and jagged, tore through debris, flinging chunks of concrete and fire into the air. Screams echoed, human and alien alike, but the humans did not break. They acted. One human lunged forward, tossing a device that exploded into a burst of light and sound, blinding the nearest attackers. They froze, stunned, but the human's calm voice cut through. "Now move." Step by step they followed, hesitant, fearful, but moving. Each motion mirrored the human instinct learning from instinct, and slowly, impossibly, the tide turned. The young who had doubted herself, trembling beside the human, felt something ignite within her. Courage, perhaps, or maybe the sheer, stubborn defiance that humans carried in their bones. She hurled a device of her own, aimed not with precision but with will, and watched as it struck true. The creatures recoiled and the human grinned. "See, you're learning, you're surviving, that's what counts." But even as victory seemed within reach, the human paused, eyes scanning the horizon with a subtle unease. "This is only the beginning. You think this was the worst? You haven't seen anything yet." They didn't like that. They wanted rules, they wanted limits. They wanted boundaries they could understand. Humans lived outside boundaries. That was terrifying, and yet somehow inspiring. When the last creature had fallen, the humans gathered their wounded and their weary. They laughed softly at minor injuries, joked to keep spirits up, and moved forward. They followed, hearts pounding, bodies trembling but moving, alive. One elder finally broke the silence. "They are miraculous, unpredictable, and they endure." "Yes," the human said quietly, "and you will too, but endurance isn't a gift, it's a choice. Every day, every second, you choose to rise, you choose to keep moving when everything screams to stop." They watched, thoughtless at first, then slowly understanding began to seep into their minds. They had been trying to survive by hiding, by surrendering. Humans survived by defying, by daring, by fighting even when hope seemed lost. And now they were being taught the impossible. Night fell again, and the fires of battle cast long shadows over the ruins. They sat, bruised but awake, and listened as the humans whispered plans, laughed softly at mistakes, and reminded each other that fear was temporary, but defiance was forever. "You're stronger than you know," the human said, eyes locking with one trembling. "Stronger than you'll ever understand until you choose to be." And slowly, impossibly, they began to believe. Not because they had no choice, not because survival demanded it, but because humans made belief contagious, infectious, dangerous. The alien heart that had once been ruled by fear now trembled with something new. The raw, undeniable spark of hope. A spark that could ignite worlds. Because humans didn't just survive, they transformed survival into art, into defiance, into a statement that the universe could not ignore. And thus they were about to learn just how powerful that could be. The wind carried a new scent, iron, smoke, and something unfamiliar. A threat beyond the creatures they had faced, beyond anything they had imagined. The humans sensed it immediately. Their pace quickened. Every glance, every breath, every footstep carried purpose. They were predators in their own right, not because they hunted, but because they refused to be hunted. One young shivered. "It is larger, more dangerous. We cannot survive it." The human turned, eyes hard, voice steady. "Maybe not. Not if we go in thinking we can't, but we will survive it if we refuse to quit, if we don't hesitate, if we fight when everything says to run." They didn't understand that kind of courage. Fear was meant to paralyze, to dictate limits. Humans refused limits. They created possibility out of sheer stubbornness. And now they had no choice but to follow or perish. As they approached the source of the scent, the ruins twisted into a landscape of horror. Metal structures bent and groaned, some still smoldering from recent destruction. Shadows moved faster than the eye could track. The ground trembled not from footsteps, but from something far larger. The human knelt, checking his supplies, then looked back at the... "Listen to me carefully. This isn't just about fighting. It's about understanding. Every movement matters. Every decision can save a life. And yes, it will be terrifying, but fear is part of surviving." The first roar shattered the silence, a sound that ripped through the air like a blade. They gasped. They had never heard anything like it. Their minds wanted to flee, to retreat, to calculate every possible way to survive without confrontation. But the human didn't flinch. He smiled. "Ready?" he asked. They hesitated, then nodded. Somehow they knew there was no turning back. From the shadows emerged a creature unlike the others, massive, armored, with eyes like burning coals. Its claws scraped the ground, leaving deep gouges, and its roar reverberated across the ruins. They froze. The human exhaled slowly, shoulders steady, and stepped forward. "Stick close," he said. "Watch me, move when I move, trust me, and fight when I say fight." They did as instructed, hesitant, trembling, but following. And then the impossible happened. The human moved with a rhythm that seemed to mock the beast. He dodged, weaved, and struck with precision born not of calculation, but of instinct. Fear fueled him, yes, but it did not stop him. One young, trembling beside him, found herself moving almost automatically, mimicking his actions. She had never been a fighter. She had never been brave. And yet here, guided by human will, she found herself striking, defending, surviving. Each success built upon the last, and each time she did it, a spark ignited within her, a spark of something she had never felt before, confidence. The human roared a command, not loud but piercing. They moved in tandem. The beast faltered. Every strike, every movement, every breath was an act of defiance, and slowly, impossibly, they began to turn the tide. The elder watched, disbelief and awe warring within him. How can they do this? They are too fragile, too small, and yet... "Endurance isn't about size," the human said, glancing over his shoulder. "It's about refusing to quit, about choosing to move when the world screams for you to stop. That's human. That's what makes us unstoppable." They felt it in their bones. Not just the fear, but the undeniable truth. Humans thrived where others faltered. They were unpredictable, unrelenting, and somehow capable of bending the impossible to their will. By the time the creature fell, the ground was, the air thick with smoke and the scent of victory and blood. The humans moved among the, checking for injuries, laughing softly at minor wounds, whispering encouragements that carried far more weight than any weapon. They began to understand something terrifying and beautiful. Humans didn't just survive. They inspired. They reshaped reality with courage and defiance. And for the first time in generations, they felt the impossible pulse within their own veins, the knowledge that they could endure. Night fell over the broken landscape. The human set up a small fire, its glow spilling over the weary. He sat, arms resting on his knees, eyes distant but unyielding. "Tomorrow will be harder, but remember this. Surviving is a choice. And right now you've made it. You've chosen life, not fear. And that is the first step to greatness." They sat silent. They didn't fully understand, not yet, but they felt it, the spark. And sparks, once lit, can become fires that change worlds. Because humans didn't just survive. They endured. They inspired. And though they were beginning to see that perhaps, just perhaps, they could do the same. The next morning came with no fanfare. The sun rose pale and weak, casting long shadows over the city. They had slept fitfully, haunted by the screams of the previous night and the weight of what was coming. Humans, however, woke as if nothing had happened. They stretched, yawned, joked quietly, and moved with a calm energy that reason. The elder watched them in silence. How can they be so at ease? The world burns around them, and yet they smile, they laugh, they move as if nothing threatens them. Because they have no choice, the human said, voice low, almost tender. Choice doesn't come from comfort, it comes from persistence, from refusing to let fear dictate your life, from daring to fight when the odds say you can't. That's what humans do. A younger, trembling, asked the question that had been gnawing at all of them. But what if we fail? What if we cannot survive the next wave? The human crouched beside her, hand brushing her fragile arm. Then we fail together, but failing together is better than surviving alone, because even in failure you learn, you grow, you endure, and one day you'll surprise yourself with what you're capable of. They didn't fully understand. Humans didn't merely survive, they endured, learned, and became stronger with every loss. It was incomprehensible, maddening, and somehow beautiful. Their next challenge appeared faster than expected. A distant rumble rolled through the ruins, growing louder, more insistent. The humans stood, eyes narrowing. They're coming! Larger, faster, stronger, we have no time, move. The followed, hearts pounding, muscles trembling, minds racing. And yet, step by step, they kept pace. Humans moved among them, guiding, instructing, sometimes just standing firm, daring the world to break them. When the creatures emerged, it was chaos incarnate, a wave of destruction that could have crushed thee on its own. But the humans moved like a force of nature, unpredictable, relentless, unyielding. They fought not just with weapons, but with cunning, humor, and audacity. One human laughed as he dodged a massive claw, tossing a device that exploded in brilliant sparks. "You see," he shouted. "You can, you just have to try." They hesitated at first, fear clutching at their hearts. And then they tried. Guided by the humans' rhythm, they struck, dodged, and survived. Every success fed their courage. Every act of defiance, no matter how small, ignited something inside them that had been dormant for centuries: hope. In the midst of the chaos, the young who had once doubted herself now moved with quiet precision, following instinct, mirroring the human's every action. Her hands were steady, her mind sharp, her heart fierce. She was no longer fragile. She was learning to endure. The elder, watching from a vantage point, whispered in awe, "They are teaching them to survive in a way we never could have imagined." "Yes," the human said, eyes scanning the battlefield. "Not just survive, to endure, to become something more, to choose defiance over despair every single day." By the time the last creature fell, silence descended, a heavy, trembling silence that was almost sacred. The humans moved among the, checking wounds, offering quiet encouragements, reminding them that survival wasn't just about strength. It was about persistence, courage, and heart. They had begun to understand something profound. Humans didn't merely confront the impossible, they reshaped it. They didn't wait for fate to decide, they acted. They endured, they inspired. The human knelt beside one young, placing a hand over hers. "Remember this feeling," he said softly. "The fear, the chaos, the triumph, all of it. This is what it means to survive, to endure, to be human. And now you can take that with you." This heart raced. Fear was still there, lurking in the shadows of their minds. But so was something else, determination. The spark of hope had grown into a small flame, fragile yet fierce, ready to burn brighter with every challenge they faced. Night fell once more, but this time it was different. The firelight revealed faces no longer only afraid, but resolute. The humans sat among them, calm, steady, alive. And the fragile creatures once ruled by fear began to understand the impossible, that with humans, even the weakest could become unstoppable. Because humans didn't merely endure. They transformed fear into courage. They transformed chaos into order. They transformed despair into hope. And they were only just beginning to realize the magnitude of that gift. The dawn brought no relief. The air was thick with smoke and ash, and they felt it deep in their bones, a creeping dread that no amount of human optimism could entirely banish. The creatures they had fought before were only the beginning. Something larger, older, hung over the ruins like a storm waiting to strike. The human didn't flinch, not once. His eyes scanned the horizon, calculating risks not with numbers but with instinct. "They're coming," he said quietly. "Bigger, faster, smarter. This time we might not get a second chance." The froze, not because of doubt, but because they realized they were beginning to trust him. And trusting humans had always been terrifying. They weren't predictable, they weren't cautious, and they thrived in chaos. And yet, that unpredictability had saved them again and again. One of the young whispered, voice trembling, "We are not ready. We cannot survive this." The human crouched beside her, placing a steady hand over her trembling one. "Maybe not yet, but survival isn't about being ready. It's about deciding you will act no matter how unready you feel. That's what humans do. That's what makes us unstoppable." They looked at him, confusion and awe swirling in their large, luminous eyes. Unstoppable. They had never thought in such terms. To them, survival had always been about caution, retreat, and avoidance. But humans didn't merely survive, they challenged the universe to stop them. From the shadows, a sound rose, a deep, resonant growl that shook the very ground. The creatures were massive, their armor jagged and their claws sharp enough to rend stone. But the humans moved with calm precision, dividing, circling, coordinating without words, a living symphony of action. They followed as best they could, hearts pounding, bodies trembling, minds screaming to run. But the humans' resolve was infectious. Step by step, they mirrored their movements. They dodged, they struck, they endured. Every small victory fed a flame within them that had long been buried under centuries of fear. The human laughed sharply as a creature lunged at him, dodging and striking with impossible timing. "You see, you just have to try." A young, once trembling with fear, now moved with startling confidence. She threw a device at the creature, striking true. For a moment, disbelief flickered across her face, then pride, courage, the realization that she could act, that she could endure, that she could survive. But the victory was fleeting. Another wave of creatures emerged, larger, faster, more intelligent. The ground trembled beneath their approach. They panicked. "We will fail," one whispered, despair clawing at his throat. The human stood, shoulders squared, voice rising above the chaos. Not if we refuse to let fear decide. We act, we fight, we endure together." And together they did, step by step, strike by strike, the humans, and moved as one. Fear still lingered, but it no longer ruled them. The impossible began to feel possible. Amid the battle, the elder realized something profound. Humans were not merely survivors. They were catalysts. They transformed despair into hope, fear into action, weakness into defiance. And through them, they were learning to do the same. Hours later, as silence finally fell, the survivors gathered amidst the ruins. The humans checked for wounds, shared quiet reassurances, and even laughed softly at minor mistakes. The bruised and battered felt something new, awe, respect, and an unfamiliar warmth in their hearts. The human knelt beside one trembling, placing a hand over hers. "Remember this," he said softly. "The fear, the chaos, the triumph, it's all part of being alive. Survival isn't about being perfect, it's about daring to act when everything says you can't. And now, you've chosen to act. That's more powerful than you know." For the first time in centuries, they felt the impossible pulse within them. Not just hope, but determination. Not just endurance, but the spark of courage that could ignite entire worlds. The human leaned back, eyes scanning the horizon. "Tomorrow will be harder, but tonight, remember what it feels like to fight, to survive, to endure, and to know, even in the darkest hours, you're not alone." They sat in silence, absorbing the weight of his words. Fear still lingered, yes, but so did something far more potent, belief. Because humans didn't merely endure. They transformed fear into courage, chaos into purpose, despair into hope. And that they were beginning to realize that survival with humans was not just possible, it was unstoppable. The horizon burned. Smoke twisted into dark pillars that clawed at the sky, and the ruins below trembled under the weight of approaching doom. This time, even the humans paused, scanning, calculating, not for survival, but for strategy. They felt the tension ripple through them, thick and suffocating. "They've never seen anything like this," the human muttered, voice low, almost to himself. "Neither of us have, but that doesn't matter. We act. That's what counts." The elder swallowed hard. Act, they had been taught their whole lives to retreat, to hide, to preserve. But these humans, they acted even when the odds screamed against it, and that very defiance was contagious. The first wave hit without warning. Gargantuan creatures, moving with intelligence that was almost human, tore through the debris. Their claws cracked concrete, their roars shattered windows miles away, and their presence alone threatened to crush hope. Humans moved first. One leapt forward, dodging a strike that would have shredded and landed squarely between the attackers and the fragile aliens. "Follow me," he shouted. "Now." They obeyed, hearts hammering, minds screaming. Step by step, they mirrored his movements, their fear slowly transforming into a new kind of focus, terrifying, exhilarating, alive. A young, trembling at first, now moved with purpose. She hurled devices, blocked attacks, and even laughed at her own mistakes, the sound carrying over the chaos like a fragile bell. She had never imagined herself capable of this, and yet, under the guidance of humans, she was becoming something more than survival. She was becoming defiance incarnate. The human ducked a massive claw, spinning to strike the beast with a calculated force. "It's not just strength," he shouted over the roar. "It's courage, and courage is contagious." They felt the truth in those words, felt it ignite a fire in their hearts. Every strike they landed, every dodge, every tiny act of survival became proof that they could endure, that they could rise above what they had always feared, that they could choose to act rather than cower. Hours passed in a blur of smoke, screams, and fire. They were pushed to their limits, every instinct screaming retreat, every thought screaming fear. And yet the humans didn't relent. They moved with a rhythm born of defiance, a stubborn insistence that the impossible could be conquered. The elder watched the youngest among them, seeing something he had never seen before. Courage not born of calculation, but of choice. The young moved as if the humans' will had become her own, every act of defiance a testament to the power of example, the contagious force of the human spirit. Finally, when the last creature collapsed in a heap of twisted metal and scorched flesh, silence fell. Not peaceful, not comforting, still charged with adrenaline and tension, but there. They could breathe again for the first time in days, and they felt something new, triumph. The human walked among them, checking wounds, offering quiet reassurances, laughter threading through exhaustion. "You survived," he said softly. "Not because it was easy, not because it was guaranteed, but because you chose to, and that choice, that's more than survival, that's what makes you alive." They looked at each other, fragile, trembling, yet somehow different. The firelight reflected in their translucent skin, painting them in shades of courage and possibility. For the first time, they understood. Survival wasn't about hiding, it wasn't about precision, it wasn't about fear. Survival, true survival, was about daring, enduring, and choosing to act even when the universe whispered that you couldn't. The elder spoke quietly, almost in awe. They have changed us. They have made us see what we never could, that we are not weak, that we can endure, that we can be more." "Yes," the human said, voice calm but resolute. "And this is only the beginning, remember it, every choice, every act, every time you rise when you could fall, that's humanity, that's why we endure, that's why we are unstoppable." As night fell over the scorched horizon, they sat among the humans, hearts still pounding, bodies exhausted, minds alive with new possibility. They had been fragile. They had been afraid. But now, under human guidance, they were something else entirely. Survivors who dared to defy, who dared to endure, who had begun to understand the power of hope. Because humans didn't just survive the impossible, they transformed it. They turned fear into courage, despair into determination, and weakness into defiance. And they had learned to follow, not blindly but with choice, with intent, with hope. For the first time in generations, they believed in the impossible. And they understood, finally, that survival with humans wasn't just possible, it was unstoppable. The sky was a storm of fire and shadow, the remnants of countless battles painting the horizon in jagged streaks of gold and ash. Silence hung heavy, almost sacred, broken only by the occasional crack of burning ruins settling. They had faced horrors they had never imagined, yet here they were, still alive, still breathing, still learning to endure. The human stood at the edge of the devastation, shoulders squared, gaze fixed on the horizon. "We've come far," he said quietly, almost to himself. But this is where it matters most. This is the moment that will define us all. They watched him, some trembled, some clenched their fists, some stared at the ground, heartbeats pounding like drums in their fragile chests. And yet they trusted him. They had no choice. And slowly they realized that trust had grown into something else, belief. The enemy was unlike anything before. Colossal, intelligent, merciless. It had adapted to their tactics, countered every move, and yet the humans didn't hesitate. They moved with a rhythm born of defiance, a force that refused to yield. And the inspired by example moved with them, step by step, strike by strike, heart by heart. One young looked at the human and whispered, "Why do you keep fighting? Why do you risk everything?" He smiled, faint and steady, as if the question were the simplest thing in the world. Because we can, because fear is only powerful if we let it be, because giving up, that's easy. Enduring, defying, choosing to act when the odds say you can't, that's what makes us human. And now it can make you unstoppable too. The battle erupted with a force that seemed to shake the very stars. And humans moved as one, fear and courage, chaos and order entwined. Every strike was a statement. Every act of defiance, no matter how small, became proof that survival was not a passive act. Survival was choice. Survival was courage. Survival was humanity. The elder, watching from a vantage point, whispered in awe, They are teaching us to endure, to defy, to rise when everything tells us to fall. How is this possible?" The human glanced at him, eyes calm but fierce. "It's always been possible. You just needed to see it in action. That's what humans do. We survive, we endure, we inspire. And sometimes we show the universe that even the fragile can be unstoppable." Hours passed, the battle raging, the impossible testing them at every turn. Yet though once fragile, trembling, and despairing, now moved with purpose, with courage, with something they had never felt before, belief. Belief in themselves, in humans, in the power of defiance. Finally, the enemy fell, collapsed into ruin and silence. The world was broken, yes, but alive. And the battered, bloodied, yet unbowed, felt something incredible stir within them. Hope made real, forged in the crucible of courage and human-led defiance. The human walked among them, checking wounds, offering quiet reassurances, and smiling softly at the smallest victories. "You survived," he said, voice steady. "Not because it was easy, not because it was guaranteed, but because you chose to act again and again. And that choice, that is the spark of life itself. That is why humans endure. That is why we are unstoppable. And that is why you are now unstoppable too." They looked around at each other, fragile beings transformed. They had faced extinction. They had faced terror beyond imagination. And yet, here they were, stronger, braver, alive. Not because the universe had spared them, but because they had dared to defy it. Night fell, quiet and profound. The humans sat among the firelight illuminating their faces, their expressions a mixture of exhaustion and awe. "Remember this feeling," he said. "The fear, the chaos, the triumph. Remember that you endured, that you acted when everything told you not to, that you became more than what the universe expected. That is the power of being alive." The elder finally spoke, voice trembling with reverence. We never imagined, we never believed, and yet we endured, because of them, because of you, because of humans." The human nodded, faint smile curving his lips. "And now you carry it with you, the courage, the hope, the defiance, the spark that says even the fragile can be unstoppable." For the first time in generations, they understood the impossible. Not just survival, not just endurance, but transformation. They had been fragile, they had been abandoned, and yet with humans they had become something more, something unstoppable. The sky stretched above them, stars faint but unwavering. The ruins whispered of loss and fear, yet beneath it all something stronger endured, the fire of life, courage, and hope. Because humans didn't just survive. They inspired, they endured, and they had learned to do the same. Even in the darkest hours, even when the universe whispered that survival was impossible, humanity proved, once again, that being alive means choosing to rise, choosing to act, choosing to be unstoppable. And that was the gift they had given the